brought the plight of South African women under the spotlight once again. The crime statistics were released last week, revealing that in 2019 to 2020, a total of 2,695 women were murdered in South Africa, down from 2,771 in the 2018-2019 year. This means that a woman is murdered every 3 hours. A total of 943 children were murdered during this period. Former Statistician-General Dr. Pali Lehohla joins us now to discuss these figures. A very good evening to you, Dr. Lehohla, and thank you so much for speaking to us. I'd like to start with the number of murders in South Africa. Now, those increased by 303. But the number of women and children dropped slightly. How can this be explained?
Well, how would I explain the idea of going to the heads of murderers? I think it's one of those things that are not easy to explain, except to say it's better that fewer people are murdered. But of course, the number of murders have increased, meaning that basically, these violent acts affect males a lot more, quite disproportionately, when you look at murders at 21,000 now in South Africa, and 10% of those being female, and 900 of those being children. That it has dropped. It's something that should be welcomed cautiously. That it should be eliminated is what we should.
And I'm glad that you say cautiously, because I want us to explore that a bit more. According to the statistics, a woman is murdered every 3 hours. Why have we not seen an increase if that is the case, especially if in the past we were told that women disproportionately account for as victims of violent crime, especially in contact crimes such as murder?
Well, I think it's the nature of the scene of murder. It's the gruesome nature of how this happens. It's not just shooting a woman, but it's raping her first, leaving her hanging her on a tree, or burying her. This is the nature of the crime. It means that first, these are people who might know each other intimately, and then there is a bit of a cover-up, because certainly where people know one another or each other intimately, the likelihood of being arrested in that gruesome murder is possible. And therefore, there are all kinds of tricks that are played, including burning the body and so on. I think it is that gruesome nature of the scene that I would like to say exaggerates or whatever you, amplifies the nature of murder for women. Because it's 10%, 2,000 compared to 19,000 or rather 18,000 that occurs to men, where basically it's fighting between the men and so on. But with women, they actually become serious victims of this in a victim sense.
A total of 943 children were also murdered. This figure and that of women murdered in relation to the population, what are the figures telling us? What is the picture?
Well, I think the per 100,000 murder rates are very low in many countries. South Africa still features the highest, and this number is not subsiding. In fact, it's increasing over time, although for women it has slightly gone down. But it might just be a blip, because certainly this scourge continues. And as we enter the month of women, of course, there have been some women murdered right at the beginning. So it must concern us a lot. And I think the police did something quite good in terms of trying to analyze what are the drivers of this murder. And one of the things is the family situation. In fact, 49% of all this, particularly I'm thinking about where not so much crimes of murder, but crimes generally. 49% of these crimes happen where amongst people who know each other. They happen on a Saturday and a Sunday, when people are not at work, when they are actually in social gatherings. And these social gatherings not necessarily are the cause of the crimes, but it is what gets discussed in those social gatherings. What is the meaning of those social gatherings? So as we think about social compacting, we actually have to try and find out what solutions can be made in relation to social gatherings, because human beings are gregarious and have to gather. And we cannot say we can't gather because we fear murder.
I'd like to talk about sexual offences, Dr. Lehohla. It's a broad category of crime. 53,293 of these acts were committed, especially in cases of rape. Is it clear from these latest figures, just in terms of women and children, how badly they are affected? Are we able to read into that?
Well, I think the numbers are much higher than that. In the case of murder, usually you have to find a corpse and bury the corpse. In the case of a crime like rape, the substance that has to be identified is always invisible. Whereas a corpse is something that you cannot bury or hide that simply, but the case of rape can be. So 53,000 is probably half the number of rapes that occur in South Africa. And because these things happen amongst people that know each other, they negotiate, they discuss. It's family members. This is disappointing to us. It's putting us in bad light. So negotiations emerge. And if you look at the general crime scene of South Africa, yes, 53,000 is a lot, but there is a lot more that happens there. That's
Dr. Lehohla, I'd like to focus on rape in particular. So South Africa's legal definition of rape in itself is broad. Police recording an average of 116 rapes each day. Is there any recent or nationally representative estimate of how many women are raped in South Africa each year? And I ask this question against the backdrop of, we spoke about the figures before, the fact that murders and sexual assault have gone up. If you look at the average, though, that it's gone down in women, it further begs the question, so if it's gone up, who is more affected or worst affected?
Well, I think the numbers for women, that slight down on murder, it's just a slight drop. Basically, rapes get reported to, there are two levels of things that happen in rape. A rape occurs, then the person goes and reports the rape at the police station. Not all rapes that occur get reported. Unlike all murders that occur actually get reported, even if the body is found later. But in terms of rape, because of the social nature of rape itself, when it occurs, there are always negotiations, and the numbers are much higher. If you look at the national representative sample, I think it's twice that number that people say, we know of someone, or at least there has been a victim of crime. So if you look at victims of crimes stats, generally on matters rape, on matters robbery, on matters of all this, twice the number of these things occur as compared to what is reported.
I'd like to ask if there is a triage, so to speak, because you mentioned that there are certain crimes which escalate or lead to other crimes. Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal accounting for the highest number in terms of assault or attempted murders. Is there a correlation or some convergence in the numbers that we're seeing in some of these categories of crimes?
Well, I mean, I think the police have also broken down this by station where it occurs, which tempers what I'll be saying. In terms of population size, Gauteng is the biggest province in South Africa, so is KwaZulu-Natal. So naturally, you would expect more of this crime proportionately to happen there. But they are actually disproportionate, particularly when you start looking at this by police station, and then you use the population base as a factor. There are other drivers that are just not population size, but the proximity between disparities, the inequalities that occur between the rich and the poor. That proximity, when you look at the hotspot analysis, you will see that there are pockets that are driven by those kinds of things. What is the face of a person who gets robbed is mostly a single male who is employed, or somebody who is middle class, because there is money. Who gets raped? Obviously, this one has a particular feature and it's usually the underprivileged that get these kinds of problems.
I'd like to ask a final question, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this. Common assault, that's also increasing, meaning on average 453 people were victims of this type of assault every day. Is it possible to decipher the extent that digital platforms also play, given the fact that some culprits use these mediums to express not only their intent to commit crime, but actually report having carrying it out? Are we able to glean some information from this?
Well, I would argue that social media helps us to identify where these crimes are, and it gives us the episodes and anecdotes around it. But most of the crimes happen in the privacy of individuals fighting, where generally there is no social media. So I think social media only gives us the gory detail of what anecdotally in these other things, including what basically triggers these kinds of crime. In that respect, it is very useful. For instance, the social media of the killing of the American lawyer gripped society and led to specific emotions and probably drive change. In similar ways, I think, in South Africa, because these things go viral, particularly when it is in the racial context or at schools where these things happen and we see these things going viral. But more generally, in the hundreds of thousands where this happen, we don't see those. And they are increasing. And we don't see them also not reported because of this social nature of how these crimes occur amongst people that know each other, and then they clean each other's wounds and say, no, let's not go and report this. It's okay. So it still represents underreporting. So when you compare the numbers as reported by victims of crime in SABC and as reported by the police, you will see that there is a serious underreporting because of the nature of the crimes amongst of the settings where these crimes occur. And of course, we forgive each other and the crime is not reported.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pali Lehohla, former Statistician-General, just unpacking for us the various categories of crime, how women and children are affected. Of course, this in line with Women's Month, but also just giving us some context behind those figures.